Hello and welcome to the book show on Diversity Television. I'm Ava Colopy, a writer of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. My work often focuses on our lived experience of social issues and how they play out in family dramas. We are here in Ireland, the land of literature, higher education, and the gateway to Western Europe. So today I'm going to talk about Ernest Hemingway and primarily focus on a collection of short stories, which is matter-of-factly called the 49 First Short Stories. Now, Hemingway was a journalist, so he could be very matter-of-fact, but his work supports something called iceberg theory, which is that it's the idea that for everything that is said, basically what we can see, there's 2 times as much meaning hidden beneath the surface. And everyone who's an expert on the subject will tell you that is how to read Hemingway's work. Not just the lines you see, but what must be under them. So Hemingway was a great and famous writer in his time, very loved and celebrated in his time. Then in more recent times, such as the 1970s, with the feminist movement, they changed the narrative on Hemingway. Now, I don't decry feminists generally, as this movement did many great things, like give us our first female justice in the Supreme Court in my country, and those are the kind of things that people forget about when they discuss feminists in a disparaging way today. They did other great things, such as legalizing abortions to keep them safe, to keep women from dying from unsafe, illegal abortions, which happens in every part of the world where abortion is illegal. That being said, I feel like I have to give a little sidebar to saying I am pro-choice, I am not pro-abortion. I perhaps naively think that no one is pro-abortion. But anyway, so feminists changed the narrative about Hemingway from one of sort of blind celebration of him as a great man to one, in my view, of trashing him and his work. Now, for a long time, the social narrative was basically heroes and villains. Almost all of our heroes were men, and if a famous man did some incredible things, we would focus only on his good and ignore any negatives or actively try to deny them and write them out of history. So for example, General and later President George Washington, he has been portrayed as only a great man, and for a long time that image was infallible. Later narratives changed to wanting to point out only his flaws with certain people. That was their narrative, basically one, in my view, of trying to trash him. So both of these views are severely skewed, and about one group pushing their agenda on others. Basically the view that straight white men are just great, or the view that straight white men are just bad. Both incredibly skewed views. In reality, our George Washington did some amazing, great things, like help found the world's first modern democracy, thank you very much, which in many ways inspired the modern world to change to being more about representing the common working people and protecting them instead of just exploiting them, and ultimately making it so that everyone has a voice. This is a very modern concept. He also had negative traits which were common in his time, namely owning slaves, not a small matter at all, not downplaying that. But we need to put him in the context of his own time period. It makes no sense to take someone out of their context and then judge them by modern criteria at this point over 200 years later on. To understand him and not just be profoundly biased against him, we must view him in context. This is also true of Hemingway, a man born in the Victorian era in the 1800s. He helped break Victorian social boundaries by being a then cutting-edge artist in the modernist movement. And now we can have, because of the modernists, more than just one narrative of a person or their art. We can have multiple perspectives simultaneously on the same person, the same event, the same artwork. We don't need to see historical figures as infallible, nor turn around and betray our ancestors and totally trash everyone that came before us. Just as with Hemingway, he was a great writer, and simultaneously he had a drinking problem and a temper. We don't need to say he was just amazing or that he was only bad and trash him. We can look at it from both perspectives simultaneously, all of the facts. The portrayal of him by the very good actor Clive Owen in the somewhat historically inaccurate film Hemingway and Gellhorn was Hemingway's public persona, and a lot of people judge him on that public persona, but it may very well have been just that, a public persona that he was somewhat calculating and putting out there, because it was very good for his career, and he could actually get away with writing a lot of kind of touchy subjects, like having homosexual characters in some of his stories. He could get away with that because he had this sort of undisputed masculine public persona, so he could, it's more likely he was able to write what he wanted to that way. But that may have been largely just his public persona. Now, I don't fault, as I'm saying here, I don't fault Clive Owen for that. He did a very good job of portraying, I'm sure, the script that he was given, but I'm saying that that may be an inaccurate portrayal of who Hemingway really was. Because in some of the books I've read about him, some of his closest friends described him not as this sort of bombastic male figure, but as actually a quieter, more patient father figure who loved passing on masculine skills by teaching them fishing, shooting, and other outdoor skills, and could be very patient about it and very supportive. Some will find hunting and fishing offensive, but our ancestors survived for millennia by doing just that. And narratives that we get from the modern animal rights activist movement obviously did not exist in Hemingway's time, so it's ridiculous to judge him by those very modern standards. A lot of men, as well, are proud to pass these skills on, just as I read before about some American Indian tribes in what is now New Mexico passing on weaving and other skills down the female lineage for centuries, and they're very proud of this, and that makes sense, doesn't it? So of course sometimes men want to pass these skills on. Now for me, it was my father that taught me how to shoot a rifle, and my brother taught me how to sew by hand, so sometimes it doesn't have to be a gender thing, but sometimes it is, and it's part of a bonding thing and a cultural thing to take those skills from our ancestors, or from the male lineage or the female lineage, and there's nothing wrong with that. So whether Hemingway really was sexist is highly disputed. For example, in his short story, Hills Like White Elephants. Now, many claim the woman in the story has an abortion, and many claim that she does not. And either interpretation could be, you could choose to view either interpretation as sexist, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, because of the censorship in the time period, it's not entirely clear what happens in the story. But there's more than one way that you could interpret it, and that's largely based on if you're going into it with maybe an open mind or with an agenda. You're for him or you're against him. So that would blind you to maybe actually interpreting the story. So for a man in his time period, and we have to compare him to men of his time, not men and women from our time, to really understand him, he has to be in that context. For men of his time, he could actually be pretty forward-thinking about a lot of things, and his stories had a lot of strong and independent women. And as my main English professor in college pointed out, he gives a woman in one of his stories the greatest compliment that he can, which is that in For Whom the Bell Tolls, he says that Pilar is a great storyteller. And in real life, he named his beloved sport fishing boat Pilar. So that says a lot right there. So I suggest that we take another look at Hemingway and his work, and that he and his work were not as sexist or indeed racist as some in recent years have suggested. Remember, we have to leave him in the context of his time period, not by our modern criteria. And in any event, these views were of his time, and he was at times more forward-thinking than comparable straight, white, successful male writers of his time, even sometimes portraying these openly homosexual characters in his stories like Siesta, The Sun Also Rises. And besides that, keeping this so intensely debated implies that we females and others must define ourselves by what men think of us or by what straight white men think of us, which is ludicrous. No one needs to be going around constantly worried about how some other group of people is judging them and define themselves by that. And at the same time, we don't need to sort of empower ourselves by trashing men or any other group of people. I firmly believe that this world is big enough for all of us to be our best selves, thus nobody needs to be trashing anyone. So in any event, Hemingway was a very talented writer, wartime journalist, outdoors person, fisher person, father, and occasional spy for the US government, which is pretty damn cool. So let's look at a short story from the first 49 short stories. It is one that I have enjoyed sharing in some of my advanced English language classes for adult learners from other languages. It is called The Old Man at the Bridge. Now I'm going to read Hemingway's story off my computer because I do not have the Hemingway books with me. They are with my dear friend and ex-husband who has all the books, which is okay with me because I prefer to not be materialistic and to have as few possessions as possible and keep things simple. As you might have noticed by my general way of dressing, I don't go for fancy, generally speaking, or having a lot of possessions. So, an old man with steel-rimmed spectacles and very dusty clothes sat by the side of the road. There was a pontoon bridge across the river, and carts, trucks, and men, women, and children were crossing it. The mule-drawn carts staggered up the steep bank from the bridge, with soldiers helping push against the spokes of the wheels. The trucks ground up and away, heading out of it. All the peasants plodded along in the ankle-deep dust. But the old man sat there without moving. He was too tired to go any further. It was my business to cross the bridge, explore the bridgehead beyond, and find out what point the enemy had advanced. I did this and returned over the bridge. There were not so many carts now and very few people on foot, but the old man was still there. "Where do you come from?" I asked him. "From San Carlos," he said and smiled. That was his native town, and so it gave him pleasure to mention it, and he smiled. "I was taking care of animals," he explained. "Oh," I said, not quite understanding. "Yes," he said, "I stayed, you see, taking care of animals. I was the last one to leave the town of San Carlos." He did not look like a shepherd nor a herdsman, and I looked at his black dusty clothes and his gray dusty face and steel-rimmed spectacles and said, "What animals were they?" "Various animals," he said and shook his head. "I had to leave them. I was watching the bridge and the African-looking country of the Ebro Delta and wondering how long now it would be before we would see the enemy, and listening all the while for the first noises that would signal that ever-mysterious event called contact. And the old man still sat there. "What animals were they?" I asked. "There were 3 animals altogether," he explained. "There were 2 goats and a cat, and then there were 4 pairs of pigeons." "And you had to leave them?" I asked. "Yes, because of the artillery. The captain told me to go because of the artillery." "And you have no family?" I asked, watching the far end of the bridge where the last few carts were hurrying down the slope of the bank. "No," he said. "Only the animals I stated. The cat, of course, will be all right. A cat can look out for itself. But I cannot think what will become of the others." "What politics have you?" I asked. "I am without politics," he said. "I am 76 years old. I have come 12 kilometers. Now, and I think now I can go no further." "This is not a good place to stop," I said. "If you cannot make it, there are trucks up the road where it forks for Tortosa." "I will wait a while," he said, "and then I will go." "Where do the trucks go?" "Towards Barcelona," I told him. "I know no one in that direction," he said, "but thank you very much." "Thank you again very much." He looked at me very blankly and tired, then said, having to share his worry with someone, "The cat will be all right, I am sure. There is no need to be unquiet about the cat, but the others. Now what do you think about the others?" "Well, they'll probably come through it all right." "You think so?" "Why not?" I said, watching the far bank, where now there were no carts. "But what will they do under the artillery when I was told to leave because of the artillery?" "Did you leave the cage unlocked, the dove cage?" I asked. "Yes." "Then they'll fly?" "Yes, certainly they'll fly. But the others. It's better not to think about the others," he said. "If you are arrested, I would go," I urged. "Get up and try to walk now." "Thank you," he said, and got to his feet. swayed from side to side, and then sat back downwards in the dust. "I was taking care of animals," he said dully. But no longer to me. I was only taking care of animals. There was nothing to do about him. It was Easter Sunday, and the fascists were advancing toward the Ebro. It was a grey, overcast day with a low ceiling, so their planes were not up. That and the fact that cats know how to look after themselves was all the good luck that old man would ever have. So in this story, I really think it's important, the portrayal of the innocent civilians caught up in wartime and how hard it is for them to get through everything. And this poor old man who doesn't even have any politics, and there he is all caught up in the whole thing. I think it really shows a lot of humanity, and it really demonstrates that there are a lot more layers to Hemingway than this public persona that he had. So thank you for watching the book show on Diversity Television. I'm Ava Cullaby here in Ireland, and I hope you will join us next time for more books and opinions. To all our viewers out there, I hope you find what you're looking for.